So hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, which is called How to Deal with Reformulation and EU Ingredient Ban Review. So today I'm joined by Jessica and Denise from Beauté, who are over in the States at the moment. Just to give you a heads up, this webinar is being recorded and I'll be sending out the recording tomorrow. And also there's going to be a chance for a Q&A towards the end. So if you've got any questions as we go through, just feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we'll come around to those towards the end of the webinar. But today, there's going to be a ban of some ingredients in the EU, and it's not the first time this kind of thing happens. It's actually something that's quite common where things get changed, legislation gets changed, and you have to look at what your products are that you're selling and, if there's any changes you need to make to them. So I'll be mainly focusing on the kind of claim side and product testing today. So to give you a little bit of idea of the structure, I'll be looking at what the ingredients are that are getting banned. And then also I'll be talking about claims testing and how you can test against the reformulations. And then I'm going to let Jessica and Denise introduce themselves as well. And they'll be looking at the commercial side. So they'll tell you a little bit about what they're talking about. So Denise, over to you if you can do a little introduction.
Sure, fantastic. So I'm Denise Dente, the co-founder along with Jessica of Beauté. We are based in the US and really help brands worldwide with a variety of different things, from sales and marketing to international expansion and just about everything in between. So this is a passionate area for us. We do love talking about change and how to commercially impact, or how commercially this can impact your business and things that you can do. So we plan to share with you several tips.
Amazing. And Jessica, over to you.
Absolutely. So like my partner in crime, Denise said, our firm really is about the sales and marketing for personal care and fragrance companies. And so when we see things like regulation changes, in us on the marketing and sales side, it triggers a lot of things. Of course, on the science and formulation side, it of course triggers things. But we're excited today to delve into how to think about change from regulation or legislation standpoint, even claims as you make your claims changes, how that impacts your sales and marketing, some best practices, and even some things that we've seen in our 20 plus, 30 plus years in the field.
Amazing. Well, it's so amazing to have you both join today because, as we've discussed, a lot of reformulation, there's kind of these two sides. You've got your science side, which is the product formula, and you've got the marketing side. And I think we talk a lot about the science side, how do you reformulate a product and what kind of testing considerations are there? But actually, how you then put that into your sales and marketing is a huge step as well. And I know you guys are going to have so many examples to go through of everyone, because you guys have a wealth of experience of dealing with this kind of thing. I'm sure you've had some horror stories that you'll take us through, as well as some really good successes. And also, for those of you who don't know me, because I haven't even introduced myself, I'm Karis, and I'm the Sales Director and Regulatory Advisor at Ayton Global Research. So as you know, we focus on consumer research and in terms of that, claim substantiation as well. So that's really what we're looking at from my side, is how does it impact your formulations in terms of that regulation side, your advertising, and making sure that your new product formulations are going to live up to the advertising standards that you need to be aware of. So just to kind of kick things off today, then I'm going to share my screen because, as I said, we're talking really generically about formulation review, but let's bring it back to what's going on at the moment with the EU ingredient ban and what that looks like. So, oh, sorry, I haven't got this up properly, but we have got some changes that are happening in EU regulation, and they're to do with CMR substances. So a CMR substance, I'm going to get these words wrong, like I always do, they're carcinogenic, mutagenic, or reprotoxic properties that can be seen in products. So they are in all of the products and chemicals and everything all around us, in the air we breathe and the food we eat, there are CMRs. But obviously it's to do with the amount of that kind of product, which can make it dangerous, which is what we're looking at when we're looking at cosmetics and changing any regulations there to say about what can be used in products. Because essentially, if they're too potent, it can cause things like cancer, mutation, or problems of reproduction. So not things you want to be putting on your skin necessarily. So every regulation, every, cosmetics regulation in the world will look at, updating their CMR, library, and making sure that all the regulations are in place there. And that's something that's regularly reviewed anyway. So again, this is why this is really important to be aware of, because it is something that can happen sort of every 10 years. You might find that a product you're selling has suddenly had a review and it's not okay to be using anymore. It's something that can happen. So this CMR omnibus regulation that's happening in the EU has been going on for a little while. And there's obviously some updates that are coming up next year, which is to do with these ingredient bans in particular. And as you can see, it's the fourth CMR omnibus that's been published. So it basically means over the last few years, they're just adding and adding to it. So again, it's something to be really, really aware of, and making sure that you're up to date with it, really. And again, this isn't a scare thing. You will probably hear of it. If you're in the cosmetics industry, you probably already heard of this, but it's just something to be aware of. Maybe if you're new to the industry and you're not sure about how this kind of works generally as well. So what kind of ingredients have been having changes to them? So already in place, we've got a couple. We've got titanium dioxide, which is something that's often used as a UV filter or whitening agent. And there's been some changes that have happened in terms of the concentration that's allowed in products at the moment, and the kind of form, in terms of what form they're used in. So I thought this is a really important thing to bring up, because it shows you, it doesn't necessarily mean a ban, but the concentration can change, and it can change depending on what the actual format of the product is as well. And obviously this is already in force in the EU, but it's something to bring up as a good example. Same with salicylic acid, which is something that's often used as a cleanser or an exfoliator. And again, there's been some restrictions added to the use, and that's already come into force. So I thought there are two really good examples to use of things that have changed. The things that's really scaring people and has all been a bit crazy are the bans. So I never be able to say this word again, zinc pyrithione, or something like that, is one of the products, one of the ingredients that's going to come into ban, which is the 1st of March next year. So it's something that's currently used as an antifungal and antibacterial agent, something very commonly used in anti-dandruff products, and it's going to have a total ban. So if that's something that's in your product, if you haven't already heard of it, this is something that's really going to affect you. But again, if it's something that you're thinking of using or anything like that, again, we need to make sure we don't have that in our product. And the other one, I'm going to say the nickname for it, which is Lilial, because there's no way I'm going to say the whole name, is a synthetic fragrance ingredient, which is used in lots of different types of cosmetics. And this is one that we've seen a lot of in particular. It's been a very, very common ingredient that's been used for many years. And again, it's a total ban that comes in on the 1st of March. So making sure that we don't have that in our products. And I've got a really good example of a case study I'm going to take you through later, which is all to do about change to fragrance and what that can mean to claims, but also how you can test that as well. So just another nod as well to say that the UK and the EU are not got the same regulation anymore, which hasn't had a huge effect so far, because it's been a complete duplication. When we had Brexit, it was complete duplication of the regulation. But the new UK standards has not yet implemented these same ingredient bans, because now there is a new regulatory body set up, which is the OPSS, who is going to have an independent review of these ingredients separately. It's very, very likely that they'll probably copy it the same. In fact, there's some information on the Cosmetics, Toiletries and Perfumery Association website, the CTPA. So if you're based in the UK, they are really following and tracking what's happening with those ingredient changes. And in some cases, they're advocating for ingredients not to have a total ban as well. So if it's something and you're in the UK as well as the EU, please do keep up to date with them and make sure you're on top of it. But it's very important just to bring up that it's not going to be the same. And this is what we're really going to start to see now, I think, is that, where everything's been the same, any new updates are going to have a different review. So this is when it's going to start to get complex. We kind of all saw it coming when Brexit happened, and this is the start of that. But for you guys at Buzz Beauty, we've talked about all these ingredient bans and what's happening, but if anyone is hearing this for the first time or hasn't yet had any kind of adjustment to their strategy or anything like that, where are they going to start if they're thinking about what they're going to do in terms of their commercial strategy here?
Yeah. So look, regulatory changes and change in general just are always happening. And like you said, Karis, the fact that it's changing for EU, which may be different from the UK, we experience it here even in the US, where even from state to state, we could have differences in changes. So the first thing that we always suggest is have a regulatory specialist on speed dial, and they will be some of your best friends. That way you can get the most current information and constantly be looking at your formulas and staying updated. So again, if something's new, we'll tackle it in this webinar. If something is already underway, we can address that as well. From a commercial standpoint, when we look at change, whether it's regulatory or something else, there are really three actions that we think can be taken. There is this do nothing path that can be taken. And really what that may mean is you've already made the changes that Karis has talked about. You have reformulated, you have repackaged, you are already underway and you do not see a challenge. The other part of this, when we talk about a ban, that may mean a few different things to sort of define that. A ban might mean that you have to get it off the shelf altogether. So it has to be pulled off the retailer shelf, out of warehouses, and out of the geographic area. It can mean that change is coming. So these March dates may mean that the change is underway and you have a period of time to comply with that. And so knowing what your choices are and how you're going to approach it are super important. That's where this do nothing path might mean that you're already underway and you're already aware of these changes. The other part of this do nothing is you might choose to accept the risk. Now, not something that we advise you to do or anything else. It's just a choice. You may choose that my risk is very small. Therefore, I'm not going to do anything. So that's one path you may take.
And I'll jump in really quick too, Denise, because I do think another interesting part of this do nothing piece is if you potentially have partners that are in the territory where there's regulation change, and if the way your contracts are written, maybe it's something like you've sold them the product and the contract is written so they've assumed all aspects of the product. And in that country, they are the ones that are responsible for either removing it or maybe doing something about it. So the do nothing path can sometimes, we've seen in our experience, be because the manufacturer, if you're the manufacturer, you've sold the product on. A great example of this is if you sell direct to consumers. If you sell direct to consumers and that sale has been made, then in this case, obviously future product doesn't need the ingredient, but you are not required to do something in most cases. Obviously, we're always going to say check with a regulatory person or legal person, but that's what sometimes that do nothing also means. That sale is done and it's moved on, and there really isn't any other options for you.
Yeah. The next path really comes down to this remove path, meaning at some point you may have to actively remove it from the market. And this is where we talk about definitely have a plan, because commercially you need to know how much product am I removing and what am I going to do with it. So if you are required or if you choose to remove it from the market, we talk about pulling it back, return it, resell it to markets that are not affected. Or you may have to do what's called destroy and field. In some cases, the expense of bringing product back, particularly now with freight charges and the complexity of moving goods around the world, it might make more sense to destroy it in field. And there are companies that you can hire that will do that will destroy it properly, that will recycle it, and so forth. So this remove it from the market may be another choice that you have from a commercial point of view. And then last is sell it through. So in talking about these effects that are going to happen in March, knowing how much product you have in the field, and what are your actions to sell it through. So now is the time to start building sales plans and programs that any product that has these things in it, can I sell it through? How will I sell it through? What is my run rate? So I know how much more I need to sell in addition to what my normal flow is. So this is also a great tactic. We've got 3 months before some of this goes into place for these March dates. So put in some really aggressive sell through plans. Then you can reassess at some point, maybe around February or mid-January, to say, are my run rates increasing? Is my sell through plan happening at the rate that I need it to get it off the shelves and out of the market? In some cases, even selling it at a small profit or at cost of goods, even in some cases, might be the thing to do to mitigate your risk, mitigate your expense, not have to bring it back, and so forth. So this is an opportunity to sell it through by building sales programs. And really what we say is, to make the best decisions about which path to take, you definitely have to have the data. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But if you've got the data on the rules and regulations, on how much product you have in the marketplace, on what your run rate is and how you're going to sell it through, you will be in such a powerful position to make good, informed choices. So that's some of what we recommend for this area of, how do I take action now that I know this information?
Absolutely. And then we can move to the next slide, Karis. We can talk about, I think you brought up a great question. If this was the first time that you're hearing about it, I think Denise walked through a lot of great options. If obviously you've heard about it for a while and you already are underway or have already made those changes, that's fantastic. But one of the things that we work really closely with clients on is how to manage change in your business, because it always happens. In this case, we'll talk specifically about regulation change, but we kind of have a system, a process for the way that we manage change. And when it comes to regulatory change, Denise is absolutely correct. The more information and data that you can get, the better. And so that inventory analysis for regulation change, definitely taking a moment and understanding your inventory. Making a list, down and dirty, what list of SKUs are affected. Of those SKUs, which ones are really important? What are your A SKUs, the ones that move quickly, sell through quickly? What are your Bs and what are your Cs? And this is, in some cases, let's say this regulation only affected your C, a couple of your C SKUs, then you're going to make a very different decision, right? Those are your slow moving SKUs. There's not a lot of money in them for your business. You're going to make a potentially very different decision than if it's going to affect even one of your A SKUs. So knowing what it affects, and then really making that breakdown, like Denise talked about, of where is it in its life cycle? Is it still in the PO stage and you're getting, you have a PO out to your contract manufacturer and they're ordering raw ingredients? Do you have a bunch in your own inventory and warehouse? How and where is it in the marketplace, on shelf, in partners' warehouses? Where and what does that product look like, so that you have a full understanding of where you are in the life cycle and how many quantity you're really talking about and how much it really does impact your budget when you choose to make the decisions you're going to need to make. And then
in this area, Jess, we're spending a lot of time with customers and clients talking about that. Where does the product live? So when we talk about the product life cycle, we're not literally talking about the marketing life cycle of the product. We're talking about where that inventory lives. And if that inventory is the affected inventory, how much is it, where is it, and where is the sticking point? So if sales out of that ingredient, or of that product, are slowing, then it may get backed up in the chain. If you are increasing sales out and you can push that material out in a meaningful way, then you can flow in new product that meets the new regulation. So knowing where your product lives in every stage of it is so important. And knowing sales out data at retail level, at wholesale, how much is in your partner warehouse, that is going to be what gives you the best data to know what to do.
Absolutely. And a big part of that is because then we can start to really put a budget around what is the full cost. So as Denise mentioned, if you are thinking, okay, we have to remove this from the market, how many are we really talking about? Where is it, so that we know the cost of shipping it back, or maybe we decide to destroy in field because it is a lower option. So being able to put a budget around what those individual SKUs, where they live, what they are doing, and how much it's going to cost to make those changes. And to Denise's point, if you've already made those formulation changes, you are ready with the contract manufacturer, they're already building you new product, let's say, then you obviously want to see, okay, how can we either speed up our sales out so that we can get that new product in time for March or whenever that set date is, or, okay, we are months out. As I look at my inventory months coverage, I am actually almost a year away from being able to put in this new product. And so that's where we want to make sure that we go into a commercial plan. And what does that commercial plan look like? Because the more upfront, the more runway we like to say that we have in making and planning for this, the better. But look, Denise and I can speak to this. We have been there where it caught us by surprise. We weren't ready. We didn't know. And so absolutely, we had to make a very quick commercial plan. How are we selling through? How are we communicating with our partners so that they know, guys, we heard this too. We are making changes. We understand it affects this, and this SKU. So here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to help you move it through. Here's what the plan is to backfill or to reformulate. And then being really honest in that conversation, because we've had a situation where it took us many months to have a new formula ready and to have a new product ready to come to market to replace what was changed. And absolutely, it was painful. We had to have all those hard conversations, but it also gave our partners the ability to plan with as much heads up as they could, and also build that trust that they know, look, we're honest. We didn't see this coming. We should have seen it earlier. We're sorry. And here's what we're doing to make it better. And then they also can manage appropriately. So within the commercial plan, what action specifically for every SKU are you doing? What is the timeline realistically? And I think that's some of our favorite things too, is we sometimes we'll be told, hey, we can make this happen fast. Oh, we can bypass this part of testing. And this is where, Karis, your organization is such a help here. And we don't recommend that. We don't recommend to get to market faster. We should bypass our opportunity to do the proper testing or claims, the things we need to do. And so really, what does that timeline look like? And then what is the communication plan with either our partners at wholesale or even the end consumer? And we've had great PR success when we have been open and upfront and honest with our customers about a delay or a change or something. And so even that direct conversation. And now, thankfully, with technology, it is much easier with social handles, websites, emails and e-blasts. We can communicate directly to be able to make sure our commercial plan is understood and that we can execute accordingly. So those are really the kind of the first big ones that we do. And then, really kind of, we've talked about, if your product is found in market, if it's in market, maybe you didn't have as great a data as you thought. Maybe you didn't, get some of the information that said that there was still product in a warehouse. And therefore, without being able to see it, you didn't know it was there. It did get flagged. Somebody noticed it, whatever it may be. It's happened. And Denise and I will definitely share some examples of that. But we have for sure seen this. The best way, just like with your commercial plan, is to have direct and honest conversations with authorities. So if they're the authorities that are involved, if let's say they have flagged it, have a direct, honest conversation, be humble, figure out what you can do to move forward. in most cases, in our experience, most authorities also want to resolve it. Their goal is to keep consumers safe and to figure out a good plan forward. So, we've had a situation where, they found something. It was obviously for us mortifying in a lot of ways. And we spoke to them and they said, look, it needs to be resolved. You have 3 months. We paid a fine and we did it. We had it done in 3 months. They came back, they saw it, they were okay with it, signed off, and we continued moving forward. So having those direct, honest conversations with authorities, with contractual partners, making sure everybody that needs to know knows so that they can do what's the right step for them. And then, of course, as you can tell, we're big proponents of having a plan. So in that case, the example I provided in which an authority said, you have 3 months to fix this, we quickly figured out what plan we could execute to get us the right formula in the market in 3 months. And so having a plan, and sometimes this takes money. Denise and I wrote a book called Whip, Fire, Money. And the book really is about taking your beauty brand global. And where we felt the need to get this information out is in this case. There are times where you need a whip, where you just need to be tenacious and keep after people. And there's times where it is going to take money. And sometimes when you have a very short window, it may be expensive, but it's money. You can pay it, get it done, and keep moving forward. So if you haven't had a chance, check out Whip, Fire, Money. But definitely, we always love these 3 tools. And this is, again, a way to help move through some of these regulation changes.
I do think that in this area, having that plan, or what we refer to as scenario planning, is so important, that even if your products are compliant now, at some point in the life of being in beauty, you may have a situation that comes up where you're no longer compliant. And just having a scenario and a plan of how you're going to do it and framework of what your consideration points are is important, because when you do get that notice, and oftentimes what they do is they contact you and say, we have found this product in the market and we want you to call us. And at that point, you can feel the blood racing through your body. And if you already have a plan sort of laid out of, all right, we are going to approach this very honestly and very directly, and we are going to resolve it. And even the tone and how you address it with these authorities, we have found makes all the difference. So going in and having that positive attitude of, we're all here to work together. We want to comply with your rules and regulations. So tell us what we can do to work together on this, and we'll make it happen. Oftentimes, just having that point of view and that tone is going to take you a long way, because again, all they want to do is get the problem resolved. And so if they see you as a partner in that, that may get you a very, very long way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And look, we also had a situation in which, we had a great partner, and some things about that partner had changed in their personal and professional lives. And suddenly the information we were getting from them wasn't accurate. And so they had product that wasn't supposed to be in the market still. So in some cases, we didn't know essentially ahead of time. So in those situations, right, being very forthright and honest, and then obviously having other conversations with that partner. But those types of situations, we absolutely want to make sure that, we're honest, we're doing everything we can. And like Denise said, it's a really important piece is the tone, how you're addressing them, obviously with cultural differences, that matters. So knowing a little bit about the authorities, what, country they're in, perhaps the type of way they do business, that helps. You need to be a little bit more direct if you need to be a little bit more of a relationship builder. So thinking about some of those cultural pieces as well as you kind of maneuver your way through making the right changes and getting your product compliant again. And then finally, our last piece here is, of course, as anybody, hindsight's 2020. So the better you can be prepared with your key experts and having regular meetings to be ahead of these types of changes. This is really kind of the pre part. So for this, absolutely having regulatory meetings with key experts, obviously regulatory consultants, authorities, those are great, great people to have on your brand. But in addition to that too, even legal authorities, making sure that, legally some things may need to be adjusted or changed. Obviously, having your market research partner for claims and what you can and can't be saying. Having regular meetings, that could even just be once a quarter. And a lot of times what we've seen with really great legal or authority partners, they have newsletters that go out on a monthly or quarterly basis. And they do tell us what's coming. So if we see something and it's kind of flagged, we go, that is coming down the pipeline in 18 months or so. We think that might be affecting the regulation changes. We'll go back and then, of course, look at what we can do. So anywhere that we can have these essentially status or regular meetings, or even be getting this notification earlier so that we have as much runway to make those decisions, and really keeping those relationships and those connections with the right people. And in most countries, they're sitting right there too. You've got consultants there, you've got, of course, your legal team, and they can help interpret what's going to happen or what they believe is changing, and then allow us to get the appropriate time to reformulate and really look at our product. In some cases, we've just discontinued a product. It was a C SKU, it wasn't worth it. We just discontinued it. Some cases completely reformulated, new packaging, even new marketing campaigns. So getting that ability to just have that as part of your regular business cadence is really good practice.
Even just repositioning the product, like we've talked about before, you may have to bring it back and reposition it into a market where it is compliant if it's an A SKU and you have a lot of inventory. So what this really kind of comes down to is knowing the regulations, when they go into effect, how they're going into effect. Is this a complete ban, meaning it needs to be completely off the shelves? Or is this a process that they're giving you more time to do, and you can bleed in your inventory and sell it through? And then that plan, and know that as a CEO, CFO, somebody's making the final decision on this, gathering your key stakeholders, regulatory, your sales folks, your legal people. You may get conflicting information because your legal folks obviously are going to be very conservative, and your sales folks will almost always be very aggressive with, we'll just sell it through. And you as a decision maker are going to have to take all of that information, knowing where the inventory is and so forth, and then make the best decision for your brand, taking all those things into consideration. What you don't want, obviously, is to be caught on your heels and not have a plan, not know what to do, not know who the key stakeholders are, and be scrambling. So this really does give you that opportunity now to frame it up. And Jessica and I, this is what we do. So if this is something that we can help with, we're always glad to.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, guys. That's such a really concise way of breaking down a very complex issue in terms of those steps and everything. And I think some really key takeaways there is, obviously, I think exactly that, staying up to date. If you are in more than one market, there are so many organizations out there that give you regular kind of updates about regulations and also, any changes that are happening in the market. And just doing that, it's such a simple and easy step. So if you're in the EU, if you're signing up to the right organizations, I mentioned things like the CTPA earlier, if you're in the UK, these kinds of people, you will regularly get these updates. So it shouldn't be seen as something really scary and that you have to be like Googling it every day, like making sure that you know what's going on. There's so many things that are out there. And I think another thing as well is things like mistakes happen, right? As you said, you can accidentally have something on the market. It happens all the time. And it's something we see really often. Well, not really often, but it happens where clients will approach us and say, we've been caught out by the Advertising Standards Authority. We haven't got any evidence on these claims. We didn't really mean to. It was an accident. And in that case, that very often we were able to back them up in hindsight. Because a lot of the time, again, it's a mistake. They kind of know the product does it, so they started saying it, but they didn't have the evidence behind it. So we can look at doing that or even changing the evidence. We've had it with certain claims of our clients where they're very, very strong claims. The ASA have got involved and said that there's not enough evidence behind it. And we go, okay, well, what more evidence can we provide? And it's all something you can work with. And as you said, it's just being really humble and saying, look, I made a mistake, own it. And then you can look at what you can do to fix it. The worst thing, like you said, is getting on the back foot and trying to defend yourself out of it. Hey, it's really complicated. Everybody makes mistakes, or everybody gets caught out. It's just dealing with it really well. So I think that was such a really good message to take away from that. So for anyone listening that's going, oh my God, I'm hearing this and I know I've done something wrong. No, it's fine. We can fix it. There's always a way to fix it. So I think that's a really important takeaway as well. Interestingly as well, we talked about the kind of different plans and the different timelines and things like that. And as you said, one of those really important things is claims. So I do want to talk about that a little bit. And actually, in terms of this particular EU ingredient bans that are going on as well, there are some solutions to issues. So we've had a couple of clients that have had Lilial in their products. And we've had to look at what the formulation changes are and if those claims still exist. So there are what we call formulation concessions that we can make. So if there is, so for example, in this case, none of the claims that they had substantiated from us had anything to do with the fragrance. And the fragrance itself, the change they made, had no significant difference to how the formulation would perform. So therefore, we signed a concession. We say that, no, that's absolutely fine. The claims that we have substantiated are still going to carry forward, even with this change in fragrance. Because the formulator has signed off, there's no difference that can be determined. And we know that there was no claims about the fragrance itself. So even if there is a change to the fragrance, it won't affect those claims that we have in place. So that's a really important thing to know, is that it doesn't always mean you have to start from the scratch again. It can mean slight formulation changes. We can look at what that data is and look at it on a case by case basis and what we can do to help there. An important thing to put into there as well is what we do if, for example, we decide, okay, there is a claim about fragrance, or even if we say, okay, there's not a claim about fragrance, but we do want to check that this product's going to perform the same way it did. So that's the case study I want to run through today as well. So obviously, it's really important to note that we've got our EU cosmetics regulation. So if we are looking at the EU ingredient changes in particular, when we're talking about our claims, they need to still fit within the 6 common criteria. So I really quickly wanted to bring that up just to give us a real overview of what that is. So the product has to be legally compliant. If it has got those ingredients in them, there's a ban. The product's no longer legally compliant. We need to make sure we're reviewing those claims. The claims need to be truthful. So again, if you've stated that the product has a certain ingredient in it and that it has an effect, and then that ingredient gets removed from it, well, that product doesn't have that claim anymore. So we then need to look at what the truthful is behind those claims and look at readdressing them. So yeah, if you've got any ingredient claims and that ingredient changes, it needs to come out. You need to have evidential support. So obviously, that's what we provide. It's the evidence behind those claims to make sure that you can say them. It needs to be honest. So again, if you've got that kind of that product formulation change and that you've got evidence that's behind it that may have had an effect on the reformulation, so if there's anything that could change the consistency, anything that could change the fragrance, anything that could change the product, that means that that data isn't necessarily going to apply to the new formulation. It's no longer honest, and we need to take it out and look at reviewing it. And you have to be fair. So this is usually something we use in comparison. But hey, let's use our example about removing an anti-dandruff product, for example. If you're looking at changing that anti-dandruff product and you haven't compared the way the product performs with the new formulation, there's no fairness there in terms of what the consumer's receiving. So it's really important to look at those kinds of claims. You can even twist it around in a really positive manner. We've done it before where we have comparing formulations and we get the new and improved claims, because we've said that we've tested that formulation and the new one's better. So you can look at a kind of really positive reaction there. It can be a really nice claim to use. But either way, the consumers need to be able to make an informed decision. So if there's been a change to that formulation, they need to know what those changes are, if it does have any effect on the claims they've been using and that they've been having as part of their kind of cosmetic routine. So we can carry it forward. So just to go very quickly through a case study, and then we can go through some questions as well, because I'm sure you guys have well, hopefully you've got some, either that or we've overloaded you with so much information, we'll see. But we've got some a comparison of two formulations here. So this is to do with a change in fragrance. So in this particular instance, they had a new fragrance, they had to change the supplier, and we wanted to make sure that the new formulation could not have a perceivable difference, or if it did, that it was better than the old fragrance. So we had to test it, not only the two formulations against each other, but also on people that were familiar with this formulation. It's a very well-known shower gel in the UK. So it's one of those very distinct fragrances. We needed to make sure that we weren't having any effects there in terms of what was being perceived by the consumers. So it's a comparison of two shower gels, and we're really looking at the fragrance there. So in terms of our panel criteria, we had a 50% male, 50% female panel, because that is who they know as their target consumer and who they're currently selling to. It's kind of a 50-50 split. Again, nice wide age range. They know that this is really appealing to lots of different people. We had to have normal skin because that's who the product is appropriate for. So we want to just look at the fragrance and not how it's performing on skin types. But they must have previously used the brand and the fragrance of the shower gel before, because we needed to determine that even with these new formulations, they weren't kind of like, hey, this one really doesn't smell like what I'm used to. So what are those test conditions? A sequential monadic evaluation, which is a lovely, long, complicated way of saying they had two products that they were comparing in sequence. So we had product A, product B. They had half the panel use product A first, half use product B first, then they switch. So it kind of makes sure there's no bias towards the first product used there. They used each product for 5 days in place of their usual shower gel. And we had to make sure that we had our restrictions for use in there and that they were using it on their body. And so what were the results? So there's two ways of looking at the results when you're looking at comparison study. So as you can see, I've got two questions I've lifted out of our report here. We've got the two formulations, 579 and 154. Make it nice and easy so you don't kind of get any giveaway to the consumers there. So this report, we kind of have our questions. So I've got a couple of questions listed out there. The number of people that have a satisfied or not satisfied answer, and the percentage of people that were satisfied or not satisfied. Now, I think it's important to lift out because this is how we usually look at product claims. We look at how the percentage of people that agree with an answer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're getting the right data for this type of comparison study. So in this case, we asked people what their opinion was of the fragrance, and 88% were really satisfied for the 579 and 81% were satisfied for 154. Both in their 80s, really great reaction to it. So it's not kind of a bad product either way, but obviously 88 is quite a lot higher than 81. So it's important for us to keep that in mind. We also asked if it smelled of vanilla and raspberry, because that is the distinct fragrance that was really important for this study. So we had, again, the 85% were for 579 and 77% for 154. So in this case, it's actually quite a bit of a difference, because we're looking at, if you're going to put in your advertising 77% or 85% agree with the claim, 85% looks a lot better because it's kind of in that 10% up from the other one. But again, that doesn't really give us the data we need to say, is one better than the other? Is it statistically significant? So what's really important for this kind of study, and again, this is what's important for things like reformulation. If we're looking at a product and saying, is it as good as the other one? We need to make sure that we've done a right kind of study, a right kind of test here to say if there's a statistical significance between the products. So obviously, we're looking at what percentage of people agree with a product. That could be anything between, if it's a 1 to 9 scale, it could be anything between 6 and 9. So actually, it doesn't really say much about the performance of the product in terms of how well it's rated, because obviously, you could have 100% of people give it a 6, but actually that's not as good as 80% of people giving it a 9, because that means they really rate it really highly. So that's what we're looking at here, is looking at the mean average of the product in terms of its rating and how that differs. So in this case, going back to our question about what is the opinion of the fragrance overall, we can see that 579 has an 8.14 mean average out of 9, and 814 has a 7.7. Then we've put some statistics through it, which I won't bore you with, but we get this lovely statement on our report that says there is evidence the two samples differ in their mean averages and with the amount of people that have rated it. So we've got a really clear decision there, essentially, to say that our 579, which obviously was the product we wanted it to be, which was great. It was the new fragrance, it was the new formulation. That was the one that the consumers preferred. So we were able to make a really good decision there. So it's just showing you it is quite easy to make these kind of decisions, as long as we have the data behind it, and we can make those kinds of claims as well. So again, they can say new and improved fragrance. There's ways you can kind of claim around it as well. But there are people out there to help, essentially, and we are one of those people when it comes to looking at these reformulation tests. So I think it's about time for some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I haven't seen any questions coming in yet, but if you do have any, please start feeling free to fire away in the Q&A box or on the chat, and we'll be happy to answer those. But I mean, I don't know if there's any other points while we're kind of waiting for questions to come in from you guys at all, from Jessica and Denise.
I love, Karis, how you do say, you talked about, the opportunity to also make it better and being able to say the new and improved, because I do think sometimes, when things like change happen, it's really easy to get down the path of, oh my gosh, this is a bad effect. And in a lot of times it can actually be a good, positive thing. So keeping that mindset of, how does this get better? And this new and improved, love that. I think that's such a great way to think about this.
Absolutely. I think reformulation, again, it's one of those things, as we said, we're talking about crisis mode, like bans, but it is something that happens a lot. And as you guys will definitely know, you get things like cheaper ingredients, or, you get a different partner that you have to supply for. It is something that happens. And I actually think that's a really important thing to keep in mind as well, is that retesting, it should be something you consider, because, we've had clients that have maybe tested things about 20 years ago, and they come around to us and they say, we really need to retest this. We've been using these claims for 20 years. And yeah, the formulation is probably completely different, like 20 years down the line. It's probably not even the same formulation. And as well as that, the consumers have changed, or their marketing strategy has changed, or they should revive their marketing strategy after 20 years and get some new claims behind it. So I think it's, like I said, we're talking about crisis mode today, but it is something people should always be thinking about, making sure they have recent evidence and that they're reviving how they strategize their marketing as well.
I also want to kind of bring up the situation of, we've downplayed the effect, meaning if you do get product caught in the field and you do get caught on your heels, we've talked about some options about how to comply and to be direct and honest and so forth. That's not to say that some of these fines and penalties can't be very large. So there is no rule of thumb as to how big or how small or how the authorities will handle it. And so just knowing that it can run the gamut of receiving a small fine, receiving a written notice, receiving a cease and desist, stop doing this, all the way up and through very serious fines. So if you choose to ignore this altogether, and a long period of time goes on and it's been a known issue, and you have chosen not to comply with it because you have large amounts of inventory or something like that, these fines can accelerate and or get big very, very fast based on how you respond, based on how problematic the inventory is and so forth. So while the intention is not to scare everyone, it also should be illuminated that it can be big. And you've seen it in the newspapers or on social media. When there are fines, they can have a lot of zeros behind them. And regardless of what currency you're dealing with, that may be very expensive. So just don't want to downplay the fact that, oh, we know this is coming and we'll get to it when we can. That kind of attitude may also pose risk. So just wanted to bring that up.
It's a very good point. Like we said, we were looking at it in the positive mind, and especially in the place of, like, if it is a genuine accident, you're probably in a better position. But as you said, don't think you can try and skip around and pretend that you didn't notice, because it can be really bad. imagine if one of those formulations a consumer used it, they had an adverse reaction.
Yes.
That's a lawsuit because you shouldn't have been using that ingredient. And again, even with claims, actually, like I said, the ASA in the UK are pretty kind. I've seen some really bad cases at the FTC. I think we all have, where people put claims on their products that they're not true. And again, it's a lawsuit. It becomes something really horrendous, actually. So as you said, it's really important to stay informed. It can't, listen, mistakes can happen, but we do want to stop those mistakes from happening as well.
So we have got a couple questions.
We have, I was going to say, it's great. So the first question I'll put in is from Teresa, saying, do you anticipate a trend in banning high percentages of active ingredients, e.g. 10% of salicylic acid in skincare products? From my side, I think, like I said, it's not necessarily a trend in banning ingredients. It really is that these ingredients are reviewed periodically to make sure that they're safe for use. So there's obviously been trends in things like free from, where people are like, that product's not very good, we don't want to use alcohol or parabens and all these kinds of trends. That's a trend, but it's not legislation. You don't legally have to not use these kinds of products in your these kinds of ingredients in your products. So it's important to look at what is actually legislation and what is a trend. And generally what goes into legislation is for very good reason, in terms of it can cause things that aren't good. But it'd be great to hear what you guys have to say as well.
Yeah, for this one, I would say this is where it does really help to have a regulatory consultant or a regulatory expert in your corner, or getting their newsletters, because they typically will give some type of early looks. And in a lot of cases, especially here in the US, there are groups that meet with lawmakers. So they will also have a little bit more of an insight. And so to Karis's earlier point, if you can sign up for their information and so forth, you're going to get a little bit more of a heads up about what type of legislation is being proposed or what they think might be changing. But yeah, until it actually becomes legislation, we don't know.
I think the trend that we see is that governments and regulators are constantly looking at product, and they're always evaluating it. And when they see sensitivity seems to be a point where if they see sensitivity happening, they start to explore it further. So I think it is, to Jessica's point, keeping your ear to the ground, as we say, that whatever they're looking into, because they're always looking into something, keep your eyes and ears on that, because it'll start to manifest. Either the situation will go away, there could be an organization trying to get in front of the testing and the looking at the products closer, and you might want to, be involved in that. Or it may be something that more and more sensitivity seems to be happening, and therefore they will choose to take action. So we do find that when there is a lot of sensitivity to something, that gives people a reason to scratch into it a little bit more.
And I know you both mentioned as well, saying these EU bans are happening. You can see that actually happening in California. They think it's very likely to happen.
Yeah, the US is an interesting place. Obviously, we're large geographically. And then even because we have all the states, we see that California oftentimes is very progressive in what they're testing and doing and so forth. And because the population is so large in California, we may have rules and regulations in California that don't apply other places, or they apply in California while they're being passed in other states. So that's why oftentimes there are organizations that are federal or nationwide. And then there's also some state and local laws and rules. And we see the same in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to be aware of all of it.
Yeah, it's complex.
It is. And one kind of interesting, in our experience too, if you can formulate to the area that is going to be your largest market. So in the US, it's very common that brands and products will be formulated to California. California's kind of rules, if you will, because the economic power of California is so large. that if you've got California covered, you can pretty much, cover the rest of the US. And so that's another way to look at how to, manage the budget side of this. You don't necessarily need two formulas. And the same thing with the EU, as these changes are happening in the EU, if you're reformulating, it may also be a great product then to move to the US as well, because it meets EU standards. Most likely, even if US or California specifically makes some changes, your product will still comply.
It's such a good point, actually. You also really bring that, I'm going off tangenting, but absolutely, we say the same thing with claim substantiation in terms of the kind of legislation that's out there. I think the UK is really clear, and actually China as well, about what kind of evidence is needed behind claims. So we go with that, and then that's kind of your strictest evidence needed for your claims, and that will kind of carry forward as well. We've got another question in which I think is quite interesting, which is saying, have you seen bans in one country affect public opinions in other markets, even if the ban hasn't happened there? Meaning ethically you sell off in another market, it isn't really right, and it could cost you money. So I think, from my just general broad opinion here, but I'm sure you guys have got some examples as well, it really depends on the media coverage. To be honest, it depends on what's picked up. So it's where you hear as well, like a lot of fake news and things like that. This is something that does happen quite a bit, where even if something isn't banned, if the regulations slightly change, like, we saw earlier about certain ingredients were kind of the concentration had to be reduced or something like that, it suddenly becomes this whole thing where it's like, this is a toxic ingredient and it can't be used, and other people and consumers will take it the wrong way. But I don't know if Denise and Jess, you've got any kind of input there as well.
Yeah, I think so in my experience, I think what's interesting about that is, in a lot of times, these little regulation changes, they are pretty small. And so we'll see, we'll have an opportunity, obviously, to sell it into a different market, because sometimes, let's say it's a preservative change or something like that. And in that case, that market has decided not to, but many haven't made that change. And so because it really isn't a big thing, maybe even what we find, and a lot of times too, is sometimes regulations come about, or even just consumer trend, right? So consumers want something that is without something in it. And so we reformulate to make that happen, but the consumer trend is in a different market. So a lot of the times too, we end up in being okay. And when regulations do change, unless there is a real reason, like there's serious consumer harm, and we then obviously remove it from our product, regardless of where we sold it. In lots of cases, it's like little bits of changes or a little bit of reduction. And so it never has, really become a big deal in any other market. It's interesting too, because I think culture sometimes plays a part in some of these as well. So culturally, we might not accept something in the US, but in Asia, they're absolutely fine with it. So that's kind of some of the things too, that we'll always, really do our homework first and make sure it really does make sense before we moved it to a different country. But definitely, I have not actually seen it bubble up into a big problem in another market, but I don't know if Denise, you had it.
Yeah, I think there's some things here that can be brought up. There's two paths. The first path is legislature happens, and then the consumers catch wind in one country or another region, and they catch wind of it changing in one country and not in their country. And then the wildfire of information spreads. Or it happens the other way, where the consumer starts to get educated one way or the other, and they start having consumers talking about a problem of an ingredient or a combination of ingredients that then turns into looking into it in legislation. VOCs in a place like California and other parts of the world with sprays and aerosols is something that we have seen happen, where in one part of the world, aerosols are going through some changes, either through consumer demand or from legislation, and that then bubbles over and brews over. My takeaway on this is that I always kind of equate it to a wildfire. if there is smoke, it depends on if that smoke, meaning whether it's consumer or legislation, starts to really brew and bubble. And if it does, start to watch it, because it will have a tendency to spread. And sometimes it happens through the news and the media, exactly like you're talking about. I've seen situations where news media gets a hold of something and they start spreading it. And the next thing you know, it's all over a particular geographic area. So it really is about listening and spending a fair amount of time listening to what consumers are saying and then what the legislature is saying. And it may very quickly spread. And again, it's just that scenario planning. I can't stress that enough. It's something that we put in our book. It's something that we talk to our customers about, of plan, plan, plan. If it doesn't happen, then it's great. If it does happen, you have a plan for it.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a really good point to wrap up, because I just realized we've gone over an hour. I can't believe how quickly that's gone. It's been so amazing to get your guys' insights there. And everyone, if you've got any other questions, I'll be sending out all of our contact information as well. So you can reach out to us on there. Let me just very quickly wrap up. So I have a couple of upcoming webinars next month. So on the 3rd, we've got beauty claims for supplements, perceiving the benefits. We'll be sharing some amazing consumer insights about what those benefits are for supplements and what they want to see. And then on the 10th of December, the last webinar before Christmas, it's all about making sexual health and wellness advertising claims, something that's becoming more and more popular as a kind of wellness industry area. So we need to make sure we're making the right advertising claims there as well, and we have the right evidence. So there's our contact information, but I will be emailing over, so don't worry, it'll be much easier alongside the recording of today's webinar. I just want to say a huge thanks to you both for joining today. As always, your insights have been amazing. And a huge thank you to the audience as well for joining us. And we'll be following up shortly.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.